Azerbaijani and Armenian forces clashed on April 2nd along the line of contact in what is now referred to as the Four-Day War. Dozens on both sides were killed. The skirmish marks the most violent incident since the implementation of the 1994 Bishkek Protocol and its ceasefire agreement. In any conflict, truth is the first casualty, and the fog of war makes it hard to sort out truth from propaganda. The situation in Karabakh is especially murky because there are so few objective observers. To put things in perspective, the OSCE monitoring mission in eastern Ukraine has nearly 700 monitors. Even in neighboring conflict areas such as South Ossetia and Abkhazia, there are 200 monitors. However, in Karabakh, the OSCE only has a handful of observers, meaning any event in the Karabakh conflict is subject to the nationalist propaganda by the authorities in Yerevan and Baku. In this report, we will explain the latest skirmish and how they are tied to the ongoing negotiations. And even though I am from Azerbaijan, the content of this report is based on recognized facts. My name is Yerevan and welcome to Caspian Report. For more information on the channel, visit our Patreon page. The latest skirmish between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces must be taken within the context of the Karabakh conflict. Thus, we must first clarify the background and circumstances of the conflict. Relations between Azerbaijanis and Armenians were not always hostile. Both communities lived and worked side by side during the Soviet era. In fact, there was real friendship and trust between the two communities. But in the final years of the Soviet Union, tensions reached a boiling point and war broke out over Karabakh in southwest Azerbaijan. This small region is recognized as part of Azerbaijan by the international community. However, this is disputed by neighboring Armenia due to the fact that there is an Armenian majority in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is an even smaller region within Karabakh. It's a confusing situation, but basically, following the Russian Civil War, Armenia and Azerbaijan became independent nations. Most of the international community had recognized Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. So when the Red Army emerged victorious from the Civil War, the Soviet Union conquered the Caucasus, and at the request of the authorities in Yerevan, the Soviets assessed whether or not Karabakh should be transferred from Azerbaijan to Armenia. Then in 1921, Stalin decided that Karabakh should remain part of Azerbaijan. However, as a compromise, Stalin created the Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region within the sovereignty of Azerbaijan. What's more is that Stalin designed the borders of Nagorno-Karabakh specifically to establish an Armenian majority population, as the surrounding area was mostly populated by Azerbaijanis. The Soviet leadership created many similar autonomous regions in an effort to maintain a power balance in the multicultural Soviet Union. And the Soviet management worked for a while, but sporadic violence increased by 1988. There were genuine attempts to prevent the escalation of hostilities, but for ambiguous reasons, they failed. Instead, nationalist politicians from both sides succeeded in manipulating the situation. As a result, shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a full-scale war broke out in 1992. By 1994, a ceasefire was signed by the conflicting sides. Between 30 and 36,000 people had died. Most of them were ethnic Azerbaijanis. Moreover, Armenia, the victor of the war, had not only conquered Nagorno-Karabakh, but 7 adjacent Azerbaijani regions that were part of whole Karabakh. As a result, the entire Azerbaijani population was forced to flee the region. All in all, Azerbaijan had not only lost a significant portion of its territories and suffered casualties in the 10,000s, but the country ended up with about 850 refugees from Armenia and displaced people from Karabakh. Armenia ended up with nearly 400,000 refugees from Azerbaijan, many whom later settled in Karabakh. The new boundary between the two states was set by the line of contact, where Azerbaijani and Armenian forces still face each other along a 200-kilometer long front line. Furthermore, since the ceasefire, the conflict has maintained an asymmetrical balance. Baku enjoys a vast reserve of energy revenues, which has allowed Azerbaijan to greatly expand its defense budget and has given the country more geopolitical options. Furthermore, Azerbaijan has close diplomatic relations with Russia, yet the country also follows a pro-Western energy policy, and neighboring Georgia and Turkey also cooperate closely with Azerbaijan. Moreover, Baku, together with Ankara, have imposed an economic blockade on Armenia. On the other hand, Yerevan enjoys a military alliance with Moscow that gives the country access to high discounts on the Russian arms market. However, the geopolitical isolation of Armenia forced the country into the hands of Russia. Over the years, Yerevan has conceded more and more of its industries to Moscow, and the Russians have at least 5,000 troops stationed in the country. Nowadays, Armenia's geopolitical affairs are primarily in the hands of Russia. This has turned Russia into the security guarantor of Armenia, which is what kept Azerbaijan from resuming the war. For nearly 2 decades, this was the state of affairs. However, in the recent years, the military and geopolitical balance have shifted in favor of Azerbaijan. Baku's energy policy is starting to threaten Russia's natural gas monopoly in Europe. Therefore, in the last couple of years, Russia has been using its influence in the Karabakh conflict as a bargaining chip with Azerbaijan. Essentially, Russia sees its long-term relationship with Baku as more valuable than its current alliance with Yerevan. This is most noticeable in the Russian arms supply to Azerbaijan. The position of Turkey is just as precarious. Ankara and Baku have an obscure mutual defense treaty and a long-term energy policy, but more importantly, both communities have genuine sympathy towards each other. However, the latest Turkish diplomatic support to Azerbaijan is primarily meant for PR purposes. Erdogan is trying to attract nationalist support back in Turkey in order to push for constitutional amendments that would enhance his presidential powers. Basically, Turkey and Russia have their own interests in the region. The geopolitical concern is that a Russian reaction will compel a Turkish response, which will turn the Karabakh conflict into a proxy war between Moscow and Ankara, and this is what makes the Karabakh conflict such a dangerous flashpoint. The volatile geopolitical circumstances of the conflict is the reason for the ongoing peace talks. Since the ceasefire in 1994, the OSCE Minsk group has sponsored the negotiations, which is led by Russia, France, and the United States. Twice, the conflicting sides came close to a peace settlement in 1997 and 1999. However, the resignation of the Armenian president in 1998 and the Armenian parliament shooting in 1999 derailed the negotiations. The peace talks picked up again in 2007 with the introduction of the Madrid Principles. This roadmap is based on the 1975 Helsinki Declaration, which besides the peaceful settlement of disputes, includes the inviolability of frontiers, territorial integrity of states, and the rights and self-determination of peoples. In essence, the Helsinki Final Act considers all the dynamics of the Karabakh conflict, and a step-by-step settlement was laid out as the following. First, Armenia would return the territories surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. Second, Nagorno-Karabakh would enjoy a provisional status with security guarantees. Third, a corridor would be used to connect Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh. Fourth, the status of Nagorno-Karabakh would be legally settled through a binding expression of will. Fifth, the internally displaced people and the refugees had the right to return to their former places of residence. And sixth, a peacekeeping operation would be deployed in order to ensure the security guarantees. The peace talks continued along these principles. Nearly 5 years ago, during the Kazan summit in Russia, a breakthrough was close. However, the negotiations failed. Unlike Baku, the authorities in Yerevan were satisfied with the status quo. As a result, Armenia refused to endorse the roadmap, And since then, sporadic small arms fire has escalated to exchange of sniper fire and assault operations by special forces supported by heavy weaponry. This brings us to November 2015. Once again, the negotiations had reached a critical phase. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov had proposed an updated version of the Madrid Principles, which included Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh and the adjacent regions. What's more is that the updated proposal required Armenia to withdraw from 5 of the 7 Azerbaijani regions, and moreover, the Lachen corridor, which connects Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh, would temporarily remain under the control of Armenia as well as the region of Kelbajar. Following this, Azerbaijan would lift its blockade on Armenia and communications between the two countries would be restored. Once the situation de-escalated, real talks would ensue and the status of Nagorno-Karabakh would be settled in a diplomatic way. These step-by-step procedures were ultimately rejected by Yerevan, and since then, the peace talks have once again hit an impasse. Azerbaijani diplomats feel that without pressure on Armenia, Yerevan is unlikely to change the status quo. So, following the failure of the latest peace proposal, Azerbaijan shifted its strategy. Baku now seeks to retake more strategic heights in order to control the ceasefire regime. When accomplished, Armenian forces would be more vulnerable to attacks by Azerbaijani forces from higher ground. This would lead to a steady loss of Armenian troops, which over time would make the Armenian occupation unsustainable, thus forcing Yerevan to make concessions in the peace talks. This attrition strategy is risky though. For one, it requires Baku to purchase more arms and ammunition, and more importantly, it risks a Russian response, which in turn could drag Turkey into the conflict. Thus, to prevent a larger confrontation, Azerbaijan conducts localized assaults. What's more is that since Karabakh is recognized as Azerbaijani territory, as long as the fighting remains in that region, Armenia does not have the legal right to appeal to Russia for military aid. In essence, Azerbaijan conducts small-scale operations to seize strategic heights. Baku wants to avoid large-scale mobilization of its forces, which would tip off Yerevan, so Azerbaijan focuses on localized operations. These local skirmishes are meant to be short and limited in order to keep the Russians out of the conflict, yet they are effective enough to build enough pressure on Armenia. There is no guarantee that this strategy will work, yet for all its disadvantages, Azerbaijan, after spending 2 decades on the peace talks, feels it has no other choice. Essentially, this is what happened during the April skirmish. The details concerning the clash are sketchy, but we do know a number of things. Armenia's land-based air defenses limited the operations of Azerbaijani air forces in the battle space. As a result, Azerbaijani forces relied on their arsenal of UAVs and low-flying helicopter gunships. Even though Baku was able to gain the upper hand over the airspace of the battle zone, it came at a heavy cost. Several drones as well as a helicopter were lost. Usually in war, when there is no clear air supremacy by either side, the military leadership tends to push forth the land forces. However, during the April skirmish, Armenian and Azerbaijani armored vehicles were slowed down by the rough terrain. Following this, both armies relied heavily on artillery support. Tube and rocket artillery systems became the most important tools during the fight, and it was used to destroy the enemy defenses and supply lines. The outcome was heavy casualties on both sides, with Azerbaijani forces gaining a number of strategic points and heights. One example is Azerbaijan's capture of the trench system in Lale Tepe. This strategic point provides the controller with an advantageous view of at least 1 kilometer of flat terrain, meaning since Azerbaijani troops now control it, Armenian forces will have to retreat beyond that distance of 1 kilometer. This fits well into Azerbaijan's new strategy, which we explained earlier. The names and locations of other captured posts are yet to be released, however the cost of the operation was high. Officially, Azerbaijan lost 31 troops, while Armenia lost 88. However, for PR purposes, Both sides are covering up the real number of casualties. It is estimated that Azerbaijan lost 93 soldiers and Armenia lost much more than the official 88. These numbers will increase as time goes by. Shortly following the skirmish, top Russian officials visited Yerevan and Baku, and during the meeting, Moscow once more proposed the latest updated version of the Madrid Principles as a solution to the conflict. Whether the roadmap will be accepted or not mostly depends on the Armenian leadership, as Yerevan is the one who has to make the first step. Ultimately, the Karabakh conflict is extremely complicated. Nothing is what it seems. For nearly a decade, the components of a peace agreement have been in place. However, nationalist sentiment is high in both communities. Nearly every family in Azerbaijan and Armenia is affected by the conflict. No leader wants to risk upsetting the public. For this reason, the political process has been unable to make a breakthrough. Yet, as the latest skirmish shows, the current no war, no peace stalemate cannot endure. If the latest proposal is refused again by Yerevan, more skirmishes will follow. With the importance of artillery more obvious than ever, both sides will seek to acquire more sophisticated tube and rocket artillery systems, which will make the next skirmish even deadlier. The situation as it is right now is unsustainable. In the next report, we will explain the origins of the Karabakh conflict and how the birth of nations turned friends and neighbors to foes. This Caspian report was brought to you by contributors on Patreon, and if you want to support the show, please visit patreon.com/Caspian report. For now, thank you for watching, take care, and sağ ol.